Thank you. Mariah, do you want to tee up the questions?
Sure. So we kind of answered one of them, but let's go back into it. Fair housing laws. Tell us which characteristics we can't use to discriminate between prospective tenants, and which characteristics can we use legally without a doubt to grade one prospect over another.
Yeah, I can take this question. So it looks like you said you already know which ones you can't use. So there's a whole list of them. There's a federal level, and there's obviously a state level as well. We can provide a resource for this, but it's everything from gender, sexual orientation, familiar status, age, national origin. You know, the list goes on and on. There's probably 30 or 40 things on there. Things that you can use are objective criteria. So credit rating, so getting an actual credit report with a credit score on there. Income, like total household income. California requires landlords to calculate income as an entire household, not as an individual. So you want to make sure you're definitely doing that. Rental payment history is another one. Things can get pretty tricky when you're calling other landlords and they say stuff that is subjective, like, oh, they're a little noisy, they were messy, because those could usually result in a fair housing issue should the tenant be a protected class. So you want to just stick to the facts. Hey, did they pay rent on time, or do they owe you any money, right? Did they damage the house beyond the security deposit? Those are things that we automatically deny for, and things that you can deny for as well. Another one is criminal history. This gets really sticky. Anytime we have criminal history on our applications, we contact our attorney. General rule of thumb is anytime it's a violent crime or could present a danger to other tenants or neighbors. These violent crimes would be assault, murder, attempted murder, and the other one is either the manufacture or distribution of drugs. Those are usually clear cut. When it's something else, like it could be a simple battery, DUI, those kind of things. DUI probably not going to be a danger thing, but like things like simple battery, you may want to check in with. There's a lot of pending legislation coming around these things. California in particular, there's a push to get rid of credit scores. They're saying that credit scores disproportionately affect certain protected classes. So right now, I know if you go on Experian's website, they're looking to redo how they factor some credit scores as well. Also, same with the crimes. They're looking to abolish having crimes be a factor for why you can or can't rent to somebody. But credit score, source of it, or credit score, income, and rental payment history are the three big ones, and usually the best indicators if they're going to pay or not.
Thank you, Dave. I think feeding off of that question, can the size of a family be a criteria?
No. So depending on where the house is, there can be certain restrictions on the number of occupants inside of a property. Generally, it used to say that you could have 2 per bedroom plus 1 additional occupant. So if you had a 2-bedroom house, you could have 2 per bedroom plus 1, so you could allow 5 occupants, regardless if they're related or not. It could be 5 roommates, it could be 1 adult, 4 children, whatever. Lately, there's been some cases, I think 2 or 3 years ago, that argue that if the landlord's not incurring any type of additional damages by allowing more, that they have to. There was a case, I believe it was in Stockton 2 years ago. It was a mother who had, I want to say, like 12 or 14 kids. And using that 2 plus 1 ratio, there's no houses in that market that would sustain a family of that size. So using that kind of criteria, they turned it to be a fair housing violation based on their family size. So, you just kind of want to use your best judgment on it. When in doubt, contact an attorney. 2 per bedroom plus 1 generally works, but you definitely want to factor that in.
Thank you. Once you put your property, sorry, I just lost my spot. Once you put your property on the market for rent, what steps would an owner have to take to avoid fair housing litigation in the event a close friend or relative decided they wanted to rent your place?
The old rent it to family or friend. I'd be curious to see if you guys want to put in the chat how that worked out. I'd probably say 50-50. Couple things you could do. So fair housing says you treat all applicants the same, right? So you could do one of two things. One, you could remove it from the rental market, assuming you don't have any current applications on it. You remove it from the rental market, and you just go straight to leasing it to your family, your relative, or your friend. If it's on the market and you have enough of the applicants, you should also have them submit an application, and you be selecting the best qualified applicant based on your criteria. Sometimes that actually works out better. That's what we do. It works out better because some owners are like, hey, like my nephew wants to rent the house. I'm not really sure. And it's like, hey, great, we're going to just have him apply. Like if he's qualified, then yeah, he's qualified. If he's not, like there may be a better tenant out there. You know, you're operating a business. So like what's going to be best for you? Also, you know, if you're managing it or even if you're not managing, having a friend or relative in there really makes it difficult because every time something's wrong, they're always going to come right to you. If they don't pay rent on time and they get a notice from the manager, they're going to call you and ask for that exception. You're going to have to call the manager like, oh yeah, they said that they'll pay it on the 15th. So, you know, I don't recommend it, but if you were to do it, I would have them apply just like anybody else.
Good points. Can we talk about what maintenance tasks tenants are typically responsible for?
Yeah, I can take that one. So this is an important one that you could put in your lease. We have a section that is kind of like tenants' rights and responsibilities on some of these things. A common one that we like to call out explicitly, like in our lease, is like the disposable kind of things the tenants are responsible for, right? Changing light bulbs while they're living there, changing batteries, changing furnace filters. And a good rule of thumb is damages above normal wear and tear, right? That the normal wear and tear is a gray area, not clearly defined. But if the tenant's actions or neglect caused the issue to happen, a very common one is like putting a toy or something else into a drain. You could rightfully charge the tenant for that, but we highly recommend putting that in your lease, right? Of like what general categories of things that the tenant can be charged for. So the summary of that is put it in your lease, the main topics of things, so it's very clear of what tenants might be charged for.
Yeah, and one thing to add on to that, some of the red flags that I hear people tell me is like, oh, I have this great tenant, so she needed to move in right away. So if they have to move in right away, that's a red flag when you're screening tenants. Also, they paid 6 months up front. You think that sounds great, but that's also a red flag because that generally means you ain't getting the rest of the rent. I mean, not generally. 50-50 to use Dave's term, just a red flag. And then the other one is the repair. So, hey, I'm going to handle all the repairs. Having tenants do any repairs is very risky, like light stuff like changing a filter or like, Bryce said, changing batteries, light bulbs. But even if they're responsible for landscaping, you want to put something in there like, hey, that doesn't necessarily include the trees above what you can reach with, you know, being on the ground. Or if it does include the trees, that you use a professional that's licensed and insured. So sometimes it sounds great to new landlords that a tenant's going to take care of these things or they agree to, but that can be a red flag and put you in more risk.
Yeah, thank you, Bryce and Steve.
To add on to that too, there's some additional responsibility, and it's actually been a lot of topic of litigation lately, especially here in San Diego. There's a huge development in Linda Vista that got digging for this. Owners always have the responsibility to maintain the property in habitable condition. So if the tenant breaks the window and doesn't fix it on their own, the owner has to fix the window. The owner can't allow tenants to live in a house that doesn't have closing windows, or they kick in the door. The owner still has to get that done. Now, they can still turn around and charge the tenant for it, but the owner can't let tenants live in properties that don't meet minimum standards. We can send you some literature on this. There's two civil codes on it. One, what the owner's responsibilities are. One, what tenants are in regards to habitability. Like tenants have obligations to, you know, take the trash out, to not commit waste. You know, that would lead to these conditions. So that's why, you know, there's always kind of like that gray area, who's responsible for what. But generally, as Bryce mentioned, if the tenant caused the condition, they are generally responsible for it. However, you know, should they not be able to pay for it, you know, even like hoarding would be another one. Like there's still an owner responsibility where they can't allow the tenant to, you know, waive their habitable rights.
Thank you, team. Moving on, how are the current housing market conditions in San Diego? Do you see the current demand and prices going up higher? And how much percentage do you recommend raising rents for the city of San Diego?
I can take this too. So it kind of depends. I know we have a mixture of clients in here. So if we're talking about multifamily properties, there's always like these competing stair steps of demand for housing and then like construction. And so, there's a demand, construction ramps up, and, they're 2 to 3 years, going between each other. Right now, we have a lot of new multifamily that enter the market, which does drive prices down. Now, that's not to say that's how it's always going to be. There's always still some of those Class B and C products, the properties that are, made 15 to 50 years ago that are still going to be desirable based on location. But when, supply increases, prices tend to soften. Another thing that I've seen, a couple years ago, we enacted rent control, San Diego did. And if you're in a property that's covered by rent control, your incentive to move has now been negated. So I always tell the team, hey, most people don't want to move unless it's like a life event, right? They have children, they have to relocate for work, they get married, their household size increases. So most people are staying put, and that really affects the multifamily or even condo owners when you have those 2 and 3 bedroom condos that compete with apartment buildings. Tenants are staying put because they know they don't want to increase their rent. They're already on a low rent control. San Diego, historically, 5% year-over-year rent increases were the norm. The last year, it took a dip. I would say 5% on multifamily. Single-family homes, depending on where you are, generally still appreciate in the rental amount. Again, year-over-year, 5%. I would throw out 2022. COVID skyrocketed prices even though they weren't supposed to. I think we saw on average 15% go up. Now we're basically at prices at like 2021 levels. So all that 15%, we're now 1%, 2% up on those single family homes. Another thing is inflation. So when I talk about people not wanting to move, I think the last report I saw was people are spending on our household now is spending on average $8,000 more than what they were 2 years ago. So if they're looking like, you especially like you think of a family like, hey, we want to upgrade. We want to spend $200 to $300 more in rent on this. Having to spend $8,000 more on just other expenses, food, groceries, fuel, whatever, pretty much negates that move and people are staying put. So again, demand softening, inventory rising usually leads to prices softening.
Great, Angelo, I hope that answered your question. We've got a question from Sir. When asking about income, should you specify prospective tenants to submit their pre-tax annual income or post-tax annual income?
We do gross income. Gross income because there could be all number of expenses. So we always just do gross.
Thank you. If you have a house that you're renting out that does not allow pets, but the tenants do have pets that live in the house, how does Good Life Property Management typically find this out, and what are the next steps?
I can take this. So it's very difficult. So when we enter in a house, we have to give notice. The law requires that we give notice. The only exception would be in an emergency, which is going to be rare. So when we give the tenant notice to enter, usually for an annual walkthrough, the tenants expect us to come, and usually they're going to take the pet away. They're going to take away the water bowls or any signs of pets in the house. So it's very difficult. We can have neighbors sometimes complain about it. Just, hey, the dog's barking. They'll call our office. We'll look on lease, and there is no dog there. Then we do go through a process there. Usually starts with a 3-day notice. For those of you familiar with the 3-day notice, it's like the first step to eviction. That, hey, you have violated the lease in this manner that you don't have a pet. A lot of times tenants are going to say, oh, I don't have a pet. The pet may have been visiting, and they say that they're going to cure that within the 3-day period. Nothing you can really do unless they've violated again, then you can move to an eviction. For those of you that own rental property in California, what our attorney always says is like, hey, if you serve a 3-day notice, you better be ready to go through the eviction. Because having a pet there and tenants already in place, courts are very tenant friendly, and they're very unlikely to remove a tenant over a pet. Unless that pet has shown to be a nuisance, like it's caused a lot of damage to the property, it has harassed a neighbor, it's bitten a neighbor, something like that, judges are very unlikely to go through with the eviction. They'll probably put in some sort of stipulation that the pet has to be removed by a court order, within X amount of days. But then you would have spent all that money on this eviction, and the tenants end up staying there anyways. It's just a really hard situation to be in. 50% of tenants have pets, some of them, or an animal living with them, either an actual pet or as a service animal. Getting rid of a pet is difficult.
Thank you, Dave. Kate has a tenant who signed a 6-month lease. It just expired and they are now month to month. Is it a best practice to reach out to the tenant 30 days before the 6-month lease is up to renew? She's worried that by reminding them the lease is nearing the end, they might put in their notice.
Yeah, I can take that, Kate. That's a good question. So, yes, on those short-term initial leases, which can be a great play, right, to kind of feel out, especially if you're like it's your first time renting out that property, right, or you're not entirely sure about the tenant. It's a great way to kind of feel the tenancy out. So yes, same thing applies to my advice earlier. I would have the conversation sooner rather than later. I don't think talking about the renewal is going to sway their decision, negatively, right? They should be aware of how long their lease is. And in fact, doing it early can help you out. And, my recommendation for extension on 6 months and rolling month to month is great. If you both want the flexibility, awesome. It does leave you somewhat vulnerable, right, to like a holiday timing kind of vacancy, which isn't ideal for any property type. But yeah, the sooner the better. If you roll it month to month, you might consider having them sign a month-to-month agreement if there's any terms that you want to change or anything like that. But give them at least 30 days notice if you're going to increase rent 10% or less.
Thank you, Bryce. Kate, I hope that answers your question. If the tenant does not inform you of a broken window, how would you know?
So again, another sticky situation because not all things may be apparent during a walkthrough or a drive-by. So when going back to the owner's duty to provide a habitable space, the owner has to know about it. So things that are not apparent, the owner can't be deemed negligent for it. Now, had the tenant reported it and you didn't do anything about it, for usually the law says reasonable time is 30 days, then you could be on the hook for it. But if it was never made apparent to you, then the tenant says, oh, the landlord's a slumlord, he doesn't fix the window. The owner's like, I never was notified of that. Usually it's not going to be something that holds up. That's why you usually want to put in your lease, like, hey, all maintenance requests need to be in writing. When we have tenants call something in, we start a maintenance log form that starts in the interaction with the tenant, so they're aware of the repair and there's a history of it. But yeah, not all things are going to be apparent. Sorry, going back one real quick thing on the pet thing. I know it is difficult to remove a pet based on what I said. Things you may want to consider, though, is that you could also ask the tenant for like an increased security deposit if it's within the rights of the property, or you can even ask for pet rent. So if you're scared about the damages, ask the tenant, hey, I'll let you keep the dog, give me $30 a month. Lots of tenants are willing to pay that rather than go through the process of removing the dog or rehoming a dog.
Thank you, Dave. Are we allowed to give some sort of gift or discount on rent for a great tenant?
I can take it. Yes. Just be very careful. I know like doing a holiday gift or something like that, or even a one-time rent credit is completely permissible. Just be very careful, especially multifamily owners. A, neighbors talk, and B, you could be seen as giving potentially favorable treatment. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. So yes, you can. Just be mindful of how you're doing it. It's my take.
Tenants love it. We've done this in the past, and great owners attract great tenants. Tenants feel appreciated by it, so it does buy you some goodwill with the tenant. Generally, a gift is better than a rent discount. Rent discounts for any number of reasons, even tax purposes. Just same thing with like employers giving side bonuses to employees. You need to tax it and account for it. Generally, a gift is better. Give them, what's a restaurant in the neighborhood that they like. gift card to that is usually a little bit easier.
Yeah, and another thing you can do is offer, we used to do this a lot more when the market was more competitive, is an upgrade to the property. And so to Kate's question, I really love reaching out, like Bryce said, they already know most likely, but you reach out just to say, hey, how are things going? You know, is there any issues? Are you enjoying the place? And then based on what's important to them, you can help craft a lease renewal. If they ask about the rent, you can say, I got to look at the market. Generally I do a slight increase if the market allows, but I want to make sure things are working well for you at the property. And sometimes they just want that bedroom painted, and you'd be like, hey, I'm happy to paint that bedroom for you if you renew for a year.
Yeah, carpet cleaning is a big one too. Carpet cleaning is great because it serves both people. One, you can deduct it because it's an expense to the property. Two, it actually increases the life of the carpet. So tenants love it because like, hey, great, clean new carpet, but you're also self-serving that, hey, that carpet's not going to last longer.
And it's inexpensive. Carpet cleaning is super cheap.
Thank you. What can you tell us about Section 8 tenants? What should we look for, and what are your recommendations?
All right, so in California, everyone has to accept people on Section 8 vouchers. So there's not much to look for. A new law that also came out in January says that you cannot discriminate based on the source of income. So I think I touched on this. If they are receiving Section 8, that can't be a reason why you would not want that or disallow that tenant. Section 8 has additional protections. When I talked about the three things that are objective that you could score an applicant on, so being credit score, income, and rental history, Section 8 tenants now don't have to, are exempt from being meeting credit requirements. We can send out information on this. It's a new law that just went out last year or January this year, but you cannot factor in their credit score into your decision if they are recipient of a Section 8 voucher. Basically, the only thing you can really do is rental history with them, and generally it's going to be pretty favorable because most of them are already on the program, and the program pays generally 2/3 of the rent. So their rental history is usually spotless. There's a bad stigma around Section 8 tenants. There always has been. Oh, I don't want them. They're dirty. They're not going to take care of the place. They're low lives. And that's really not the case. There's been a major uptick that we've seen in Section 8 tenants in the last year. I think they got a lot of additional funding. They have a huge backlog. It used to be like 8 years to get onto the program, and now it's sped up a lot. There's a lot more mobility. A lot of houses are exiting the market. So homeowners that have Section 8 tenants are selling their homes, and now the Section 8 tenant has to move to another property. Sorry, where I was going with this. So the rental history is always there, but these tenants are generally good tenants. Because it's so hard to get on the program, because the program is a huge value add to the tenant, they don't want to mess it up. In the history of Good Life, we have one tenant who has not paid rent. We're actually currently going through an eviction with them, but out of, I don't know, Bryce,
Dozens.
tenants on Section 8, that we've only had one not pay the rent. Section 8 also does a yearly inspection as well. So they know that, hey, this caseworker is going to come by the house and make sure it's up to snuff. So they generally take really good care of the property. When Section 8 tenants don't take care of the property, they don't pay the rent, they could be removed from the program, and it's really difficult for them to get back in it.
That's a great perspective. Thank you, Dave. All right. What is Good Life Property Management's view on allowing a tenant to have a fish aquarium?
So our lease says fish are allowed in aquariums up to 5 gallons. 5 gallons is the same size as a water jug. Most people have those in their home. That's kind of the reasoning behind it. Anything larger than that is a risk, right? And it depends on the house and what you're willing to accept as a risk. Generally, we're going to consider it a pet. Maybe across the board, we don't allow it. We'd have to run it by the owner. But, sometimes the tenant may need to get additional insurance to cover should it spill. Some properties are less risk than others. If it's a 2-story unit, having a fish tank on that second floor, it could be a big liability if it leaks. If it's on the ground floor, they keep it in a garage or in an area with hard surface flooring, it's probably less of a risk. So you always kind of want to weigh, what the benefit to the risk is. You could put, in a rental criteria that we don't allow fish in aquariums over 5 gallons, and then it's an easy way to deny it. You could say also on contrary, like fish with an increased deposit or requires additional, $100,000 in liability. So you can get pretty creative. Fish are not a protected class, race or gender is. So you can discriminate on pets all day long.
Thank you, Dave. Can you compare the pros and cons of pet rent versus increased security deposits for pets?
Yeah. So new legislation also came out effective July 1st. Depending on the type of homeowner that you are, generally multifamily owners and homeowners that own 2 or more rental properties cannot ask for more than 1 month security deposit. So it's kind of a risk on this on how you want to play it. Multifamily property owners generally want to do lower security deposits, like half month rent, just to get a quicker move in. It opens it up to a larger tenant pool. So they have room in there to increase the security deposit amount to below the legal threshold. Some people may be looking to increase the valuation or their cash flow and want that pet rent. Now, the pet rent is also, you want to, like as Steve mentioned, it's like you want to basically anticipate additional damages. Pets, they can obviously, especially young pets, can damage flooring. We find them, damaging doors, scratching on the back of doors, tearing down fences, tearing up a yard is another one. If you have nice grass and they destroy the grass, like that's thousands of dollars. So you want to make sure that whatever the risk is going to be, that you're going to be, compensated for that to offset that at move out.
Thank you. At Good Life Property Management, do we see a lot of Section 8 tenants with great income? And if not, how are they competitive at all?
So the Section 8 program, the tenants are responsible for a portion of the rent, and to be qualified, they can't do more than, it depends on the program, but it's generally they can't spend more than 40% of their household income on rent. So when they get a voucher, the voucher has maximum rent that they can afford. So let's say the tenant makes $1,000. The tenant can't spend more than $300 on rent. So that Section 8 voucher is going to be for up to $700. Now they can pick something less or more, and then the tenant has more or less household income. But if you're using, which is pretty standard, either 2.5 or 3 times the monthly income in a household requirement in your rental criteria, they're always going to qualify, because Section 8 won't allow them to pay more than that towards their rent. And are we seeing a lot of them with great income? Again, yeah, the income is all over the place. We've actually had, and this hasn't happened before, we had a few Section 8 tenants come through where the program is paying 100% of the rent. And I've never seen that before, and that's something new to us. There's probably some sort of extenuating circumstances around it, because it doesn't seem very common. But generally, these people are working and do have other sources of income. Sometimes the other sources of income are gig jobs or regular employment. Generally, Section 8 people are usually, families with only one source of income. So one parent, 4 kids, and the income isn't enough. So these programs help these people out. But as far as income, being competitive, it's kind of not really an issue, because Section 8 only allows them to get into a lease that doesn't extend their finances.
Yeah, and just one other note on Section 8 is the San Diego Housing Commission, which is the city of San Diego. They have a $500 landlord incentive to sign a lease with one of their residents, participants of the program. So that's a pro, and like Dave said, they stick around longer. They typically don't want to cause trouble because of their funding for the program. The cons are that you're dealing with a government entity to get your money, right? It's reliable, but a lot of times it's really late. It can take up to like 60 days to get your first payment. It can leave you strapped for cash. You have to get the Housing Commission's approval for a rent increase, which is more paperwork. It's online now, but that can take it'd be like pulling teeth trying to get a response. So pros and cons: reliability, but also some more legwork when facilitating things.
Thank you. Suzanne is asking, what if we notice that a current tenant is renting out a room? What can we do?
Yeah, you turn your lease. So our lease explicitly says no subleasing, right? So that it's treated like a lease violation, right? If they were not complying with any other terms of the lease. We've obviously caught this, right? Like we see an Airbnb listing for a property that we're managing, we're like, hey, that's not us, that must be the tenant. Or we do a walkthrough and somebody's like, oh, hey, I'm Chad, I'm renting this room out, and we're like, oh, okay. So you initiate a lease violation, right? For any time that happens, always like to have just a phone call conversation with the tenant, right? Like, hey, what's going on? Like, is there a misunderstanding here? I think the terms of the lease are pretty clear. 50% of the time that'll clear. They're like, you got me, we're going to fix it. And then you escalate it to a lease violation if you need to, or you post a notice to perform. Again, being ready to not bluff on that and like actually move through and like really consider like, okay, maybe we find another negotiation that's not going to cost me time, money, and energy in an eviction that's going to take 6 to 9 months that might not even get approved by court. So there's some risk assessment to do there, I guess.
Thank you, Bryce.
Subletting is one of the few reasons that you can do a 3-day notice to quit, where you don't have to give a curable time. Now, again, in California, you better be prepared to go through with the full eviction. If it's a friend staying there, generally this is going to be like that Airbnb issue, causing issues with neighbors is more grounds for an eviction. But you can move forward to a 3-day notice to quit and move forward with an eviction without giving the tenant an opportunity to cure subleasing.
Thank you. Steve, you answered this in the chat, but I feel like it's worth saying and sharing here too. Does Good Life Property Management manage any properties outside of San Diego County?
Yeah, Orange County and San Diego at the moment. I have a personal residence in Riverside County and La Quinta, but that's the only one we have in that area at that moment. He's soon to come.
Thank you. Going back to Section 8, who keeps that $500 from Section 8?
You do, Roberto. That's your money. If you rent it out to a Section 8 renter, the Housing Commission sends along with their first direct deposit an additional $500.
Thank you, Bryce. Angelo's asking, what is the hottest area renting in San Diego right now?
I mean, areas are tough because, especially even by zip code, like there are diamonds in the rough. There are houses that, based on the condition, shouldn't rent for as much as they do, but they're because they're desirable, a certain school district, certain neighborhoods. It's difficult to say. Ones that generally rent the quickest, though, and I think this has a lot to do with school districts. Poway is always really hot. Sabre Springs, PQ. Whenever we have single-family homes in those areas, they rent really quickly. Slower right now, and actually anytime since post-COVID, we're seeing a less demand for like luxury condos. So downtown is not where it used to be. I think during COVID, people appreciated that outdoor space, having more of that freedom. Downtown, there's some issues down there with homelessness and crime that really turned some people off, where it used to not be so apparent. Going down there now and walking around and touring these buildings, you're going to run into it, and it may turn a lot of people off.
So one other thing to add to that. So Chula Vista is down 12.2% for 1-bedrooms. Encinitas down 13.8%, and Coronado down 14.7%. So I guess with the exclusion of Chula Vista, some of those higher price areas are more soft with rental prices and you can get better deals. Whereas Vista, National City, and El Cajon saw the largest year-over-year price increases of 4% El Cajon, 7.4% Vista, and 9.7% National City.
Thank you, Steve. Do you guys have any recommendations on where to look for new rental property in San Diego?
Angela, you're looking to move or looking to purchase as an investment?
Assuming investment.
Investment.
Yeah, there's not a lot of deals out there right now, Angelo, but not a lot of things pencil. Like I put in the comments earlier, commercial apartment buildings are down already 20%. So if there's a deal to be had, it's probably in the commercial realm. Single family homes, there's just not a lot for sale. I think we're at the point now where everyone's like, oh, the market's never going to go down for residential. So that's usually a telltale sign that we're right about to go down at some point. But I don't know. It's impossible to predict. So I think there'll be a better buying opportunity for houses and condos coming up personally. But if you're looking for something sooner versus later, apartments.
Yeah. And Roberto, I think I don't have a last name on you, but I think I know what you're alluding to. Your property, that looks like we have a Section 8 tenant in, is actually not the city of San Diego, right? It's a different housing commission. It's the county of San Diego, and they do not have that $500 incentive. So just wanted to clarify that for you.
Bryce, thank you for looking into that. Here's another one from Kate. Let's say hypothetically I'm renting out an unpermitted unit. Should I disclose that in the lease to protect myself down the line?
No. So you shouldn't be renting it out. So generally, and this is sticky, and I've been in these courtrooms with owners that have done this before. There is a case to be made for if the tenant makes reasonable use of the premises, is generally the ruling. So if the house has all the qualifications to be a habitable space, right? It has the insulation and it has the heating elements, the plumbing that would make it a habitable dwelling. Should a tenant try and claim that it wasn't, you shouldn't have been renting it out to them, that'll usually get tossed because the tenant had made use of a habitable space. Now, if that unit doesn't meet those requirements, it doesn't have any natural light, it doesn't have a protective roof, these are extreme examples, then technically, if you were to go to court, the court could order you to return all the rent. But generally, if they make use of the space, should you go to court, you're not likely to lose. However, you will be hit with fines by the planning, depending on where the house is. You could get fined or be required to take it down. So the last one that I was involved in, we won the case where that we didn't have to return the rent because the tenant made use of the space. However, the city inspector did write a violation, and all the things in the house that made it a house had to be removed. So they had to go in there and knock down walls that separated the bathroom, remove the toilet, remove the plumbing, remove the electrical fixtures. So obviously, it cost the owner money long term, and obviously the owner had to show up in court to defend all this.
Yeah, and I think it was Roberto or someone that asked about buying a property. I think one of the best investment opportunities right now, besides apartments, is adding ADUs and getting things that are unpermitted permitted, because you can take things that would have never been permitted 5 years ago, and they're just itching to give you a permit now. Now it is going to cost you to file the permit, 15 grand or whatever it is. Maybe an architect needs to draw something up, but your costs, maybe all in, let's say, are $200-300 a foot if you're not doing some actual build. And the per price square foot sale is generally in some areas $600, $800, and PB it's like $1,200. So it's this huge opportunity to take advantage of the government actually doing something to help rental owners in one way, which is they want to give people more ADUs and more permits for unpermitted structures to add more rental stock.
Thank you, Steve. It looks like there's a chat bubble going right now, so I'm going to just give it a couple seconds. Okay. So apologize for a question from left field, but is expecting a tenant to allow a home inspector for owner purposes to inspect a house for an hour or two a reasonable ask?
Yes, it is. And our lease actually calls this out specifically. It's like with a 24-hour written notice, it'd be reasonable for the tenants to grant access to, I think it labels a different category, mostly related to selling a home, right? Like prospective buyers, home inspectors, mortgagers, I think is what it says. Yeah. So yes, for the purposes of showing and like the selling activities, yes, it would be reasonable. That's something we would work with you and or your agent or our partner agent on coordinating. There's also, it's called a 120-day notice of sale that highly recommend all listing agents utilize, that reiterates all of what I just said too.
Yeah, we can send you, there's only 7 reasons a landlord may give tenant notice to enter the property, and exhibiting the premises to an inspector is one of them. Others are smoke alarms. If they surrender the property, there's other reasons for it. We can send you that list because there's only 7, and we get asked this question a lot. Owners want to go in there and inspect for a dog, or hey, I want to see if that guy still lives there. That's actually not a valid reason. We can't enter in a property to do that because the law is very clear, and these are the 7 reasons you can enter in a property.
Thank you, Dave. Question from Zach Taylor. Zach, it's good to see you in here. How do we best object to Biden's proposed 5% rent cap that I read about?
Yeah, this is a new one, Zach. So I don't know the best way to oppose this yet. However, we are working on putting together a community for landlords that we'll be talking more about, that needs to unite housing providers to better voice our opinion and have our vote be heard and have our voice be heard for things that are important, not just for housing providers, but for our communities. I believe that rent control is bad for renters. It's bad for communities. When you talk about Section 8, rent control is just reverse Section 8, except there's no income requirement for rent control. So someone making $500,000 a year is in a rent controlled apartment, while someone who makes $50,000 a year is trying to find an apartment. So if they really want to help renters, build more houses obviously is the actual solve, and they're working on that. But expand Section 8 or something. But don't cap mom and pop landlords, because you can only push people to potentially unprofitability to a certain limit, and then they just get out of the business, and then there's less rentals. So there's a lot of unintended consequences. But I recommend, Zach, not to have a shameless plug, but we have follow us either on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. I'm really trying to build advocacy in this area of how we can make the legislative landscape more tenable. Like I said, not just for us, but for our kids, our tenants, our neighborhoods. And if you're like me and feel strongly about it being bad for everyone, it's a worthwhile effort. So I'm putting in a lot of time on that right now. So stay tuned.
Woo. Thank you, Steve, Dave, and Bryce. I think we've reached the end of our Q&A segment.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. I appreciate you sticking around and asking some great questions. We'll definitely be following up maybe with a survey. We want to hear more from housing providers of what you need, what you want, what you're missing, what keeps you up at night, what opportunities you want to see. And we want to drive more and more value to you as our community that we're going to show some love to on an ongoing basis. So thank you, Dave, Bryce, Mariah. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. YouTube channel, we'll send a link out. We'll send an email out to everyone with all the links to the social channels. It's Good Life MGMT, I believe, is the handle. But Mariah, do you have anything to say on that?
Yes. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our amazing hosts. Thank you, all of you, for sticking around past time. I hope that we were able to deliver as much value as we think we did today. If you scan this QR code, there's a ton of free landlord resources, including links to our social channels, a link to subscribe to our weekly newsletter if you're not already. So please utilize that. And we look forward to the next one with you. Thank you, everybody, again so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Take care.
See ya.